and I collaborated on this study with Dr. Susan J. Avery. Now please take a moment to read the purpose silently to yourself. So what I wanted to do was identify the most important traits and motivational practices in our respected teachers and figure out what those implications are for us. Several of us are going on into public school teaching careers, we're going to be graduate assistants, or we might just do some private teaching on the side, and I want to figure out how this information can inform us. So some research findings. Previous research states that as children begin their educational journey, they're already highly motivated to learn. And if you think about this, to illustrate this point, think about the kindergartner on their first day of school. They're so excited, they can't wait to be there and to get in the classroom and learn. Now think about the fourth grader. So there's something that happens. There's a decrease in motivation to be in a learning environment, and Bowman states that it's probably because the best teachers use the initial motivation, they sustain it, they keep it going, but maybe the best teachers aren't doing that. Another study asked gifted students to identify their best teachers, and then Gentry et al. Used qualitative and quantitative methods to figure out what those traits are and how they compare across all of the teachers. And our study is a replication of Gentry et al. Data sources, collection, and analysis. I administered a survey both in person or over the internet to 24 participants who had all completed at least one semester of music student teaching at Ithaca College. I asked these participants to describe the traits and motivational practices of a respected teacher through free response questions and numerical rating scales. This is really important because I didn't just ask them to talk about a lofty ideal, a teacher they had in mind who doesn't really exist but would do these things in utopia. I asked them to think about a specific teacher who they respected and what they did. Now, if you'll take a moment, you can read through a sample analysis. I have a question from my survey and as well as someone's answer, and I highlighted some salient themes. So what I did was I looked for the most informative phrases in the answers, and I saw how many times those came up across all of the surveys. And I just used a numerical rating to confirm the validity of this data. For example, if someone answered as a 10 to this question, but they said the teacher was terrible, never passionate, obviously hated their job, then I questioned the validity of their data. And also the numerical rating helps to paint a portrait in terms of bar graphs to see how the data spreads out across participants. So the average length of teaching career for these respected teachers was about 17.5 years. It's no small feat. These people have been teaching a long time. And if you look at the distribution, it's fairly evenly spread, maybe a little bit thinning towards teaching for several years at a time. They knew us well. These teachers got to know their students through several different ways. The first one being small talk before class. The students were entering, they'd ask them how their day was, how that sporting event that they had yesterday was, and the students really liked that they connected on this personal level. They also had what I call an open door policy, which is where these teachers said, you can come in any time to talk about academic, personal issues, anything you like. Just never hesitate to come in. And several of these teachers had such a policy. Some teachers also allowed students to eat lunch in the classroom with them or to hang out, in the band room after school. And class participation, this is a really unique finding because not all teachers are very extroverted and willing to take extra time or eat lunch with the students or get to know them on a best friend level. So I'd like to share a quote with you that really illustrates this point of getting to know students through the class participation. He didn't explicitly meet with us individually, but implicitly showed interest in and made a point to talk to all of us about our lives. I think that just goes to know it goes to show you can make that personal connection without going over the top and always spending time with your students. These teachers had very high expectations for themselves. The hot word here is constantly or always. It appeared throughout almost every single survey. These teachers were constantly striving to do better. And I'd like to share a little story that I found in one of the surveys. A participant shared that his teacher sometimes wouldn't know the answer when a student asked her a question. So what she would do is she would go look it up, and the next class she would come back with the answer. She wasn't perfect. There was nothing about her being perfect or all-knowing, but she was constantly furthering her knowledge and sharing this with her students. These teachers were constantly carefully prepared and well-organized, trying new things, especially new teaching methods, and practicing their conducting and rehearsing. And what I really liked was these teachers weren't afraid to share their own preparation with their students. Like, they let them know that they had to work hard too. As the teachers had high expectations for themselves, they also had incredibly high expectations for their students. These teachers demanded the best from everyone. And again, I'd like to share a quote that illustrates this well. He held us to an extremely high standard without putting negative pressure on us. It was fun, interesting, and exciting. And I think that really shows that students love a challenge, and they love when you help them succeed in that challenge. I don't think students, at least from this data, I don't think that students like to be babied or let off the hook. They really do want to achieve something great with your help. These teachers were also relentless in making sure the material was really being understood. And think of how many times you've been in a class with a teacher who obviously didn't explain something well and then just brushes past it and move on. And that's not a trait of fine teaching. These teachers never gave up. And another trait that was interesting, and we'll explore it a little more later, they sometimes held different students to different standards. So maybe students in a less advanced musical group were held to lower standards than students in the audition ensemble. And that kind of contradicts what's listed above, but we'll explore that in a little bit. Passion. We knew these teachers were passionate because they were always excited to be there, and they shared this with their students. This is so important. Think about the 8th grader who might be in band, and they're really not so confident in themselves. Maybe they really like playing in band, but they don't feel comfortable sharing this with their peers because it's not the cool thing to do. The teacher who just absolutely radiates and loves what they're doing can bridge that gap. They can allow the students to see that it's okay to like playing this instrument in band, and they can help them feel comfortable and come to terms with their own, what they enjoy most. I think that's really important, especially in the younger grades. These teachers never stopped pushing for student success. They were adamant about it, and they displayed visible passion for the content. Now, motivational practices. I wanted to know if teachers used intrinsic or extrinsic, and what type of motivational practices to engage their students. This data was really interesting because, as you can see on the chart, it looks like there is an even split between intrinsic motivational practices, so entirely intrinsic, and half and half, intrinsic and extrinsic, and only one person used grades and trophies and competitions as their sole motivator. So I think this is really interesting. It gives a lot of credit to intrinsic motivation, but today I feel like a lot of extrinsic motivators get a bad reputation because it's seen as not coming from inside, it's seen as bribery, but it's really interesting that these teachers knew how to combine the two. So some extrinsic motivators included trophies, high ratings, guilt. Chocolate came up. I would have liked that one. Intrinsic motivators include the desire to succeed, and the joy in solving problems, and doing our best for the sake of bettering ourselves in the music. That came up a lot, especially with the teachers with high standards. And some students were motivated by the service aspect of being involved in any activity or in a class. If they could go caroling at Christmas time, or if they could perform in a senior home, they found that to be worthwhile. So just to recap our emergent themes, these participants' most respected teachers had been teaching for many years. It obviously takes time to become that great. They knew their students well, held their students to the highest of standards, and that includes themselves. They were passionate, used a variety of motivational practices in their teaching. And there are some implications here for the beginning teacher, whether it's a graduate assistant, a public school teacher, or somebody teaching privately on the side. As a beginning teacher, you should get to know your students well, and there are many forms that this could take. You don't need to be super outgoing or always wanting to chit-chat or eat lunch with your students to connect on the personal level, and it does make a difference. You should constantly strive to improve, because nowhere in this data did anybody say that they respected their teacher because they were perfect or always had the answers. They respected them because they never stopped trying to get better. And that, to me, makes that goal a lot more attainable. If you say, oh, well, you have to be perfect to be a good teacher, sorry, might as well just be done, because no one's going to get there. But if you can constantly, every day, take a few extra steps to do better and better, then I think everybody is capable of that. Provide your students with great challenges and help them succeed. Contrary to popular belief, students really don't like being babied or let off the hook. I think that's great. It's important for me to keep in mind. Do what you love what you do, and let it show. Plain and simple. I think that if you're willing to put yourself out there, you never know who you might inspire with that energy. And decide if you're going to use solely intrinsic or intrinsic and extrinsic motivational practices. Both are effective, and both are used, it seems, pretty evenly, so now you need to decide why. Maybe there are some students who are only going to be motivated by the grades or the ratings, and you'll have to take that into account. Or are you going to use for the sake of bettering yourself in the music, and are your students going to latch onto that? You'll have to experiment with that and figure out what you'd like to do. So there are some limitations and options for further research. One limitation is this is a small sample, only 24, and there's some sampling bias. It's not at all representative of the population. However, I do think it's fairly representative of Ithaca College's student teaching population. There are always distortions in self-report data because everybody thinks that they're special, and everybody tends to err, especially in numerical rating scales, on the side of above average. Everyone thinks that their teacher was the most inspirational or the most passionate or the most hardworking, when really it'd be interesting, like Gentry et al. Did, to bring in a totally objective group of researchers and see what's really going on there and how they stacked up. So that's an option for further research too. Researcher bias. I was the only one collecting and analyzing this data, and it's very possible that I have preconceived notions that could have influenced what I saw. It would have been great, as I did in the other study, to have somebody checking and triangulating with me. That wasn't possible, but it would be great if that was an option, or in a further study if people could work together. There's some confusion over questions. I asked a question on equality, but didn't include it because I feel that I tainted the data. So when I administered the survey in person, several people asked me, hey, when you say how equal is this teacher, do you mean in terms of discipline or in treatment of students academically? And I said, just put what you think. And I left it purposely ambiguous because I wanted to know what would emerge. However, too many people had to ask me what was going on with that question, and so therefore I left it out of the findings. And I think maybe an interview would be more successful in getting that data and working together. But the most interesting thing that came out of it was that favoritism is rampant among all these teachers. By far the most common theme amongst all these surveys was, well, this is a great teacher, but they play favorites. I don't think that's right. I don't think that aligns with these other traits we've been seeing of what makes a fantastic teacher. So I'd love to see somebody explore that in research and figure out why. Maybe it has to do with the average teaching length of career, that they've been teaching a while and they're comfortable. And finally, I don't know much about quantitative data. I've never taken a research methods class, but it'd be interesting to approach this from a correlation study standpoint and see, how all the teachers who have been teaching for 15 years stack up, or see correlations between questions. I think that would be great. Any questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, because I was able to now hear your previous presentation. What would you have done differently in your student teaching had you done this earlier?
Higher standards at first in senior student teaching. I think I was very heavy-handed in saying, oh, good job, you sound so great. Especially, I student taught at Ithaca High School, and the students there are fantastic, and I was blown away. So I just wanted to be like, yeah, that's wonderful, you're playing the right pitches after junior student teaching, hallelujah. And I was just a little bit too quick to be satisfied, I think. And my ears knew that I shouldn't be satisfied, but I was too quick to jump there. And I think I did a good job of holding myself to high standards, but it also, maybe it would take a little bit of pressure off knowing that that nobody's perfect, that it's constantly striving to get better and that this is normal. So I would have felt a little better, and I would have pushed a little harder. And I did push harder towards the end of senior student teaching, but it took 6 out of the 8 weeks for me to get there.
The other part of the question is that I know that you had started to look at how that their same questions could follow them into their collegiate career. Do you have any real quick topics, sentences, or ideas about how the college professor motivational issues?
Oh, we actually asked this. I decided not to include it because I didn't think it was as strong data, but we found that pretty much the same traits apply, except students found that they liked that their professors were more knowledgeable, probably because they have terminal degrees in their field. These professors really knew everything there was to know about a topic. I mean, in comparison. But that came up a lot, especially in private study. Students were just blown away that their private instrument professors knew so much, and they liked that. but they also like the high standards. Someone mentioned that in band